So this will only take a second, but while we're here on the set of season 7, we're thinking about you. And if you are catching up on season 2, you have come to the right spot.
Yes, our friends over at the Recap and Chill YouTube channel has put this together to give you everything you need in just over 10 minutes. So a huge thanks to them, and we hope you enjoy.
The historical drama The Chosen tells the gospel stories of Jesus Christ through the eyes of those who knew him. In season 2 of The Chosen, Jesus is now openly preaching in the Samaritan town of Sychar, quickly gaining popularity and notoriety. The Jewish disciples are all struck by how their long-standing Samaritan foes are quick to accept Jesus' teachings, making them all equals before God. As Jesus' followers grow, so does his camp of disciples, as Thomas and Rama finally arrive to join the group. Despite invitations from several wealthy and powerful figures in Sychar, Jesus wants to humbly host dinner himself. While Matthew wants to conserve the money left to them by Nicodemus, John and Big James wish to spare no expense, having faith that God will continue to provide for them. Jesus decides to prepare his feast for a crippled man named Melech, who is living with his family on the outskirts of town. Melech had become crippled after attacking a Jewish man and trying to steal his horse, and now believes himself unworthy of Jesus' grace and kindness. But Jesus proclaims that heaven celebrates even a single sinner repenting and turning to God more than 99 righteous who don't need to repent. And so Jesus heals Melech and encourages him to turn faithfully to God. As John and Big James start to believe that they have earned more value in Jesus' eyes, the other disciples grow frustrated by their growing egos. When a group of Samaritans scoff and spit at Jesus, John and Big James wish to bring down fiery justice upon them. Jesus rebukes them, insisting that they are no more worthy of God's grace than the Samaritans they look down on. He encourages them to be humble and to channel their passion toward righteousness, then bestows upon them the nicknames the Sons of Thunder. While traveling through Bashan, Jesus is met by Philip, a devout follower of John the Baptizer who has been sent by his rabbi to now follow Jesus instead. While traveling as part of Jesus' camp, Philip takes Matthew under his tutelage to teach him more about the Torah. Matthew is relieved to find someone who treats him for who he is now, a follower of Jesus, and not who he was, a tax collector. Emboldened by Philip's support, Matthew begins writing an account of everything that Jesus says and does to preserve and further spread his ministry. This worries Simon, who is still bitter at Matthew for being a tax collector and fears enemies will twist Jesus' actions against him. As Jesus' followers grow in number, Simon suggests forming a hierarchy amongst the disciples. Instead, Jesus insists that this is not yet necessary, though does hint that Simon's leadership will one day be needed when Jesus is no longer around. In Caesarea Philippi, the Jewish architect Nathaniel is devastated when one of his new constructions for the Romans collapses. Nathaniel had grown up believing he was destined to build synagogues to honor God, but is now faced with professional and financial ruin. At his lowest point emotionally, Nathaniel sits under a fig tree and calls out to God, recites a psalm, and then burns his blueprints for the synagogue, believing that God has turned his back on him. Nathaniel is then visited by his old friend Philip, who gives him the best news, that Jesus is the Messiah that they have been waiting their entire lives to meet. Though Nathaniel is skeptical, he agrees to meet Jesus, who proclaims to have seen Nathaniel under the fig tree, had never turned his back on him, and that the Messiah's ministry is the true kingdom that Nathaniel was destined to help build. Having previously felt completely alone and hopeless, Nathaniel is now overcome with emotion, witnessing Jesus as a divine figure who has exceeded all of his expectations. Proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God and King of Israel, Nathaniel excitedly joins him as a new disciple. As Jesus' time is consumed by preaching and performing miracles across the land, the disciples are left to ruminate on their own questions of the Messiah's actions, like why God has allowed the Romans to occupy their land for so long. Amidst these personal turmoils, little James confesses his confusion as to why Jesus has healed so many strangers, yet never offered to heal his own lifelong limp. Jesus' mother Mary arrives at the camp, proud of the man her son has become and eager to be of use, but also confesses her sadness of how the son who once relied on her as a child has grown into a man empowered by God himself. Mary Magdalene and Rama feel self-conscious about their lack of knowledge of biblical scriptures, and so Mary begins teaching Rama to read as they study the Torah together. When a bitter Simon calls out Matthew for working with the Romans, John stands up for Matthew, comparing his work work as a tax collector to Simon contemplating betraying his fellow Jewish fishermen to the Romans. As Simon proclaims he can never forgive Matthew, the argument amongst the disciples escalates, only to be broken up by the return of Jesus, exhausted after a long day's work of preaching and performing miracles. This leads to the disciples to shamefully realize that their petty squabbles are insignificant in the face of their true calling. Elsewhere, a Jewish man named Simon Z has joined a rebel group known as the Zealots, who plot to violently overthrow their Roman oppressors. As Z gives his life to his new cause, he abandons his brother Jesse, who has been paralyzed from the waist down since he was a child. Now homeless, Jesse stays close to the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, which is reputed to have healing powers. Following years of separation, Z finally visits his brother at the pool, bidding him a final farewell before taking on the mission of assassinating a Roman magistrate. Fearing for Z's life, Jesse tries to convince his brother to turn from his violent path, but Z refuses to listen and departs to complete his mission, unaware that he is actually about to fall into a trap set by the undercover Roman agent Atticus, who is on a quest of his own to root out all of the Zealots. Meanwhile, Jesus leads his disciples to Jerusalem to attend the Feast of Tabernacles. While there, they discover that the Pharisee Rabbi Shmuel is preaching against false prophets and is specifically gathering support to bring down Jesus, the so-called Messiah. Jesus then goes to the Pool of Bethesda in search of Jesse, declaring to the paralytic that the water can't heal him, but the Messiah can. And so Jesse takes Jesus at his word and follows his commands to miraculously stand up and carry his bed mat to a new home. As Z prepares to assassinate the magistrate, he witnesses Jesse walking and is struck by the seemingly impossible sight. And so, instead of following through with the assassination, Z seeks out his brother for reconciliation. Back at the disciples' camp, Mary Magdalene continues teaching Rama to read the Torah when the pair are confronted by a demon-possessed man named Caleb. Mary tries to comfort the man, recounting her own experience with possession, but Caleb attacks her anyways. Z arrives and attempts to help, but is overpowered until Jesus casts out the demon. Z affirms that he has been seeking out the Messiah who healed his brother, and offers his dagger to Jesus' service. Instead, Jesus throws the dagger away, saying he has a better sword. Mary Magdalene is left shaken by the encounter with Caleb, choosing to depart the camp and seek out a nearby tavern, where she relapses into drinking and gambling. Jesus sends Simon and Matthew to find Mary, knowing that on their mission, the two rivals will finally begin to set aside their differences. Simon and Matthew find Mary drunk and too ashamed to return to Jesus. Matthew opens up about his lifelong selfishness, claiming that if Jesus can forgive him, he can also forgive Mary. Matthew also encourages Mary that her commitment to learning the Torah has inspired him to do the same. Simon reminds Mary that lowering the paralytic through the roof was her idea, allowing countless strangers to witness a miracle and come to know Jesus. All good works that God is doing through her. And so Mary agrees to return to the disciples' camp, where Jesus assures her that all will still struggle and sometimes fail. Jesus doesn't expect perfection, he just wants her heart. John the Baptizer arrives at the camp to meet with Jesus before journeying to rebuke King Herod for divorcing his own wife to marry the ex-wife of his brother. Jesus warns of how dangerous this mission will be, assuredly inciting the anger of the powerful king. But John retorts that now is not the time to be careful, encouraging Jesus to accelerate his ministry. Not long after, Jesus' prediction proves true when he receives word of John the Baptizer's arrest and imprisonment. As the disciples rue John's fate, they also struggle with their own dwindling food supply. Jesus takes them to a synagogue to pray, where despite being the Sabbath, he heals a man's withered hand, then permits the disciples to reap and eat grains on Shabbat. The religious leaders Madai and Lamech rebuke Jesus as a false prophet, encouraging works on the Sabbath, but Jesus retorts that the Sabbath is made for man, not the other way around, and then goes a step further, claiming to be the Lord of the Sabbath. Believing Jesus to be a blasphemer, Madai and Lamech seek out Shmuel to lend their support to his cause of bringing down this supposed false prophet. Shmuel and the fellow Pharisee Yanni petition the Jewish leaders of the Sanhedrin to take action against Jesus. Unfortunately, Nicodemus had blocked Shmuel's initial attempts, so he now must appeal to higher authorities. Obsessively investigating all of Jesus' activities, Shmuel hopes to build a case to prove that he is a false prophet. it. He also begins manipulating Sanhedrin leaders Shimon and Shammai against each other, igniting Shammai's fury over Jesus working on the Sabbath, allowing female followers to live in his camp, and seemingly aligning himself with the Zealots. Meanwhile, Atticus visits Praetor Quintus to tell him about his personal observations of Jesus, spurring Quintus to send Gaius to accompany Atticus and detain Jesus for questioning. Jesus surrenders peacefully to the Romans, promising to return shortly to continue his ministry, but the disciples worry for their rabbi's fate in light of John the Baptizer's arrest. Even in this time of turmoil, Jesus comforts his captor Gaius by assuring him that his old friend Matthew is doing well. Ignoring Jesus' instructions to remain calm, Andrew and Philip race to the city of Yotapata in the hopes of finding and freeing him. There they encounter Tamar and her healed paralytic friend, spreading word of Jesus' mercy and power to a gathering crowd. A Pharisee named Yusuf, who trusts Nicodemus, warns Tamar of Shmuel's obsessive mission to bring down Jesus. And so Andrew and Philip race Tamar back to their camp so that her testimony can't be twisted to suit Shmuel's purposes. Jesus is then taken to be questioned by Quintus, though instead of locking Jesus up like John the Baptizer, the Roman praetor instead thanks him for recruiting Simon Z away from the Zealots. Quintus decides to allow Jesus to go free, but warns him to stop creating spectacles, big crowds, or any trouble for Rome if he values his life. Jesus promises nothing but is still allowed to go freely for now. Jesus then returns to his camp to reunite with the disciples, telling them it's time they began growing into leaders who can carry on even in his absence. The disciples apologize for their doubt and ask Jesus to teach them to pray, recognizing that's how he keeps his heart and mind in the right place. Pleased with their request, he begins teaching them what will ultimately be known as the Lord's Prayer. As the season comes to a close, Jesus prepares for his largest and most important sermon yet. He tasks Matthew to help him, and the former tax collector confesses that he believes Jesus' sermon is too critical. Jesus explains that he hopes to inspire a revolution in the hearts of everyone who hears his message, though inspired by Matthew and the other disciples, decides to include the Beatitudes in his sermon, which are a collection of blessings for those less fortunate. As the disciples seek out a location for Jesus to deliver his sermon, a businessman's apprentice named Judas helps them secure a plot of land atop a hill, the perfect place for Jesus to preach to his followers. In the end, thousands of people gather at the hill, including old friends and new faces alike, to listen to what will soon become one of the most influential and timeless teachings of Jesus' entire life, the Sermon on the Mount.